Chapter 9 of The War That Will End War by Herbert George Wells. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Peter Tomlinson. Chapter 9. An Appeal to the American People. This appeal comes to you from England at war, and it is addressed to you because upon your nation rests the issue of this conflict. The influence of your states upon its nature and duration must needs be enormous, and at its ending you may play a part such as no nation has ever played since the world began. For it rests with you to establish and secure, or to refuse to establish and secure, the permanent peace of the world, the final ending of war. This appeal comes to you from England, but it is no appeal to ancient associations or racial affinities. Your common language is indeed English, but your nation has long since outgrown these early links. The blood of every people in Europe mingles in the unity of your states, and it is to the greatness of your future rather than the accidents of your first beginnings, to the humanity in you, and not to the English and Irish and Scotch and Welsh in you, that this appeal is made. Half the world is at war, or on the very verge of war. It is impossible that you should disregard or turn away from this conflict. Unavoidably you have to judge us. Unavoidable is your participation in the ultimate settlement which will make or mar the welfare of mankind for centuries to come. We appeal to you to judge us, to listen patiently to our case, to exert the huge decisive power you hold in the balance, not hastily, not heedlessly. For we do not disguise from ourselves that you can shatter all our hopes in this conflict. You are a people more than twice as numerous as we are, and still you are only the beginning of what you are to be, with a clear prospect of expansion that mocks the limits of these little islands, with illimitable and still scarcely tapped sources of wealth and power. You have already come to a stage when a certain magnanimity becomes you in your relation to European affairs. Now, while you, because of your fortunate position, and because of the sane and brotherly relations that have become a fixed tradition along your northern boundary, we English had a share in securing that, while you live free of the sight and burthen of military preparations, free as it seems forever, all Europe has for more than half a century bent more and more wearily under a perpetually increasing burthen of armaments. For many years Europe has been an armed camp, with millions of men continually under arms, with the fear of war universally poisoning its life, with its education impoverished, its social development retarded, with everything pinched but its equipment for war. It would be foolish to fix the blame for this state of affairs upon any particular nation. It has grown up, as most great evils grow, quietly, unheeded. One may cast back in history to the 30 Years' War, to such names as Frederick the Great, Napoleon I, Napoleon III, Bismarck. What does it matter now who began the thing, and which was most to blame? Here it is, and we have to deal with it. But we English do assert that it is the government of the German Emperor which has for the last 40 years taken the lead and forced the pace of these matters, which has driven us English to add warship to warship in a pitiless competition to retain that predominance at sea upon which our existence as a free people depends, and which has strained the strength of France almost beyond the pitch of human endurance, so that the education and the welfare of her people has suffered greatly, so that Paris today is visibly an impoverished and overtaxed city, and this perpetual fear of the armed strength of Germany has forced upon France alliances and entanglements she would otherwise have avoided. Let us not attempt to deny the greatness of Germany and of Germany's contributions to science and art and literature and all that is good in human life. But evil influences may overshadow the finest peoples, and it is our case that since the victories of 1871, Germany has been obsessed by the worship of material power and glory and scornful of righteousness, that she has been threatening and overbearing to all the world. There has been a propaganda of cynicism and national roughness, a declared contempt for treaties and pledges, so that all Europe has been uneasy and in fear. And since none of us are saints, and certainly no nations are saintly, we have been resentful. There is not a country in Europe that has not shown itself resentful under this perpetual menace of Germany. And now at last and suddenly the threatened thing has come to pass and Germany is at war. Because of a murder committed by one of her own subjects, Austria made war upon Serbia, Russia armed to protect a kindred country, and then with the swiftness of years of premeditation, Germany declared war upon Russia and struck at France, striking through the peaceful land of Belgium, a little country we English had pledged ourselves to protect, a little country that has never given Germany the faintest pretext for hostility, and in the hope of finding France unready. Of course we went to war. If we had not done so, could we English have ever looked the world in the face again? And it is with scarcely a dissentient voice that England is at war. Never were the British people so unanimous. All Ireland is with us, and the conscience of all the world. And, now this war has begun, we are resolved to put an end to militarism in the world for evermore. We are not fighting to destroy Germany. It is the firm resolve of England to permit no fresh conquered provinces to darken the future of Europe. Whatever betide, all German Germany will come out of this war undivided and German still. Her own conquests she may have to relinquish, her Poles and other subject peoples, but that is the utmost we shall exact of her. With the accession of Austria, Germany may even come out of this war a larger Germany than at the beginning. We have no hatred of things German and German people, but we are fighting to break this huge fighting machine forever, this fighting machine which has been such an oppression as no native-born American can dream of to every other nation in Europe. We are fighting to end Kaiserism and Kruppism for ever and ever. There, shortly and plainly, is our case and our object. Now let us come to the immediate substance of this appeal. We do not ask you for military help. Keep the peace which it is your unparalleled good fortune to enjoy so securely, but keep it fairly. Remember that we fight now for national existence, and that in the night, even as this is written, within 100 miles or so of this place, the dark ships feel their way among the floating mines with which the Germans have strewn the North Sea, and our sons and the sons of Belgium and France go side by side, not by the 100 nor by the 1,000, but by the 100,000, rank after rank, line beyond line, to death. Even as this is written, the harvest of death is being reaped. Remember our tragic case. Europe is full of a joyless determination to end this evil forever. She plunges grimly and sadly into the cruel monstrosities of war, and assuredly there will be little shouting for the victors whichever side may win. At the end, we do most firmly believe there will be established a new Europe, a Europe ridden of rankling oppressions, with a free Poland, a free Finland, a free Germany, the Balkans settled, the little nations safe, and peace secure. And it is of supreme importance that we should ask you now, what are you going to do throughout the struggle, and what will you do at the end? One thing we were told in England that you mean to do, a thing that has moved me to this appeal. For it is not only a strange thing in itself, but it may presently be followed by other similar ideas. Come what may, all the liberal forces in England and France are resolved to respect the freedom of Holland. But the position of Holland is, as you may see in any atlas, a very peculiar one in this war. The Rhine runs along the rear of the long German line as if it were a canal to serve that line with supplies, and then it passes into Holland, and so by Rotterdam to the sea. So that it is possible for any neutral power, such as you are, to pour a stream of food supplies and war material by way of Holland almost into the hands of the German combatant line. Even if we win our battles in the field, this will enormously diminish our chance of concluding this war, but we shall suffer it. It is within the rights of Holland to victual the Germans in this way, and we cannot prevent it without committing just such another outrage upon the laws of nations as Germany was guilty of in invading Belgium. And here is where your country comes in. In your harbours lie a great number of big German ships that dare not venture to sea because of our fleet. It is proposed, we are told, to arrange a purchase of these ships by American citizens to facilitate by special legislation their transfer to your flag, and then load them with food and war material and send them across the Atlantic and through the narrow seas, seas that at the price of a cruiser and many men we have painfully cleared of German contact mines to get war prices in Rotterdam and supply our enemies. It is, we confess, a smart thing to do. It will give your people not only huge immediate profits, but a mercantile marine at one coup. It will certainly prolong the war, and so it will mean the killing and wounding of scores of thousands of young Germans, Englishmen, Frenchmen and Belgians who might otherwise have escaped. It is within your legal rights, and we will tell you plainly now that we shall refuse to quarrel with you about it, but we ask you not to be too easily offended if we betray a certain lack of enthusiasm for this idea. And begun such enterprises as this, what are you going to do for mankind and the ultimate peace of the world? You know that the Tsar has restored the freedom of Finland and promised to reunite the torn fragments of Poland into a free kingdom, but probably you do not know that he and England have engaged themselves to respect and protect from each other and all the world the autonomy of Norway and Sweden, and of Sweden's vast and tempting stores of mineral wealth close to the Russian boundary. We ask you not to be too cynical about the Tsar's promises, and to be prepared to help us and France and him to see that they become real. And this with regard to Scandinavia is not only Russia's promise but ours. This is more than a war of armies. It is a great moral upheaval, and you must not judge of the spirit of Europe today by the history of her diplomacies. When this war is ended, all Europe will cry for disarmament. Are you going to help then, or are you going to thwart that cry? In Europe we shall attempt to extinguish that huge private trade in war material, that cruppism which lies so near the roots of all this monstrous calamity. We cannot do that unless you do it too. Are you prepared to do that? Are you prepared to come into a conference at the end of this war to ensure the peace of the world? Or are you going to stand out, make difficulties for us out of our world perplexities, snatch advantages, carp from your infinite security at our allies, and perhaps in the crisis of our struggle pick a quarrel with us upon some secondary score? Are you indeed going to play the part of a merely numerous little people, acute trading, excitable people, or are you going to play the part of a great nation in this life and death struggle of the old world civilizations? Are you prepared now to take that lead among the nations to which your greatness and freedom point you? It is not for ourselves we make this appeal to you, it is for the whole future of mankind, and we make it with the more assurance because already your government has stood for peace and the observation of treaties against base advantages. Already the wounds of our dead cry out to you. End of chapter 9. Recording by Peter Tomlinson. Chapter 10 of The War That Will End War by Herbert George Wells. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Peter Tomlinson. Chapter 10. Common Sense and the Balkan States. The Balkan States never have been a problem. They have only been a part of a problem. That is why no human being has ever yet produced even a paper solution acceptable to another human being. The attempt to settle Balkan affairs with the Austro-Hungarian Empire left out of the problem has been like an attempt to deal with a number of hospital cases in which the head and shoulders of one patient, the legs of another, the abdomen of a third had to be disregarded. The bulk of the Serbian people and a great mass of the Romanians were in the Austro-Hungarian system, and it was the Austrian bar to any development of Serbia towards the Adriatic that forced that country back into its unhappy conflict with Bulgaria. Now everything has altered. English people need trouble no longer about Austrian susceptibilities, and not merely our interests but our urgent necessities march with the reasonable ambitions of the four Balkan nations. Let us begin by clearing away a certain amount of nonsense that is said and believed by many good people about two of these states. It is too much the custom to speak and write of Servia and Bulgaria as though they were almost hopelessly barbaric and criminal communities, incapable of participation in the fellowship of European nations. The murder of the late King and Queen of Servia, the assassination of Sarajevo, the foolish onslaught of Bulgaria upon Servia that led to the break-up of the Balkan League, and the endless cruelties and barbarities of the warfare in Macedonia are allowed to weigh too much against the clear need of a reunited Greater Servia, a restored Bulgaria, and the reasonable prospect of a rehabilitated Balkan League. Now, there is no getting over the hard facts of these crimes and cruelties, but they have to be kept in their proper proportion to the tremendous issues now before the world. Let us call in a few figures that will fix the scale. The Servian people number altogether over 10 millions, the Romanians as many. There are more than 20 million Poles and perhaps 7 millions Bulgarians. The Czechs and Slovenes total 6 or 7 millions. The Magyars exceed 10 millions, and the Ruthenians, still under Austrian control, 4 million. It is manifest to every reasonable Englishman now that very few of these 60 or 70 million people are likely to be socially and politically happy until they have got themselves disentangled from intimate subjection to alien rulers speaking unfamiliar tongues, and it is equally manifest that until they are reasonably content, the peace of the rest of Europe will remain uncertain, so that it is upon these regions that the peace of England, France, Germany, Russia and Italy rests. The lives, therefore, of hundreds of millions of people must be affected, for good or evil, by the same remapping and pacification of south-eastern Europe. In that same remapping and pacification we are, in fact, dealing with matters so gigantic that the mere assassination of this person or the murder of that dwindles almost to the vanishing point. It is surely preposterous that the murder of an unwise young king who subordinated his nation's destinies to a romantic love affair, a murder done not by a whole nation, not even by a mob, but by less than 100 officers who were at least as patriotic as they were cruel, and even the net of conspiracy that killed the Archduke Franz Ferdinand should stand in the way of the liberation and unity of millions of Serbs who were as innocent of these things as any Wiltshire farmer. All nations have had their criminal and sanguinary phase. The British and American people who profess such a horror of Servia's murders and Bulgaria's massacres must be blankly ignorant of the history of Scotland and Ireland and the darker side of the Red Indians' destiny. If murder conspiracy was hatched in Servia, were there no Fenians in Ireland and America? We English, at any rate, have not let the highly organised Phoenix Park murders drown the freedom of Ireland for ever, or cause a war with America. The sooner we English and Americans clear our minds of this self-righteous cant against the whole Servian race because of a few horrors inevitable in such a state of barbaric disturbance, the sooner we shall be able to help these people forward to the freedom and security that alone can make such barbarities impossible. It would be just as reasonable to vow undying hatred and pitiless vengeance against the whole German-speaking race of 70 millions or so because of the burning and killing in Liège. Stifled nations, outraged races, are the fortresses of resentful cruelty. This war is no cinematograph melodrama. The deaths of Queen Draga and the Archduke Franz Ferdinand are scarcely in this picture at all. It is not the business of statecraft to avenge the past, but to deal with the possibilities of the present and the hope of the future. And the open possibility of the present is for us to bring about a revival of the Balkan League and identify ourselves with the reasonable hopes of these renascent peoples. In that revival, England may play an active and directing part. The break-up of the First Balkan League was a deep disappointment to liberal opinion throughout the world, but it was not an irrevocable disaster. The wonder was, indeed, not the rupture, but the union. And the rupture itself was very largely due to the thwarting of Serbia, not by her associates, but by Austria. Now Austria is out of consideration. For Romania and for each of the three Balkan powers, there is a plain, honourable and reasonable advantage in a common agreement and concerted action with us now. There are manifest compensations for Greece in Epirus and the islands, and we can spare it, Cyprus. For Bulgaria there is a generous rectification of Macedonia. The natural expansion of the two northern states has been already indicated. And should Turkey be foolish and blunder at this crisis, then further very natural and quite desirable readjustments become possible. What holds these states back from concerted action on our side now is merely the distrusts and enmities left over from the break-up of the First Balkan League. They will not readily trust one another again, but they would trust England. They would sit down now at a conference in which England and Russia and Italy were represented, and to which England and Russia and Italy would bring assurances of a permanent settlement and arrange every detail of their prospective boundaries in a day. They would arrange a peace that would last a century. England could do more than reconcile, she could finance. And the attack upon Vienna and the German rear would then be reinforced immediately by 600,000 or 700,000 seasoned soldiers. Moreover, it is scarcely possible that Italy could refuse to come into this war if a reunited Balkan League did so. With the Servians in Dalmatia, it would be scarcely possible to keep the Italians out of Trieste and Fiume. And long before that earnestly awaited Russian avalanche won its way to Berlin, this southern attack might be in Vienna. The time when the scope of this war could be restricted is past long ago, and every fresh soldier who goes into action now shortens the agony of Europe. But it is not with the immediate military advantages of a Balkan League that I am most concerned. A Balkan League of peace for mutual protection will be an absolute necessity in a regenerated Europe. It is necessary for the tranquillity of the world. It is necessary if the Wiltshire farmer is to herd his sheep in peace. It is necessary if people are to be prosperous and happy in Chicago and Yokohama. Perhaps Balkan League is now an insufficiently extensive word, since Romania is not in the Balkan Peninsula, and Italy must necessarily be involved in any enduring settlement. But it is clear that the settlement of Europe upon liberal lines involves the creation of these various 10 to 20 million people states, none of them powerful enough to be secure alone, but amounting in the aggregate to the greatest power in Europe, and it is equally clear that they must be linked by some common bond and understanding. There can be no doubt of the very serious complication of all these possibilities by the jerry-built dynastic interests that have been unhappily run up in these new states. It is unfortunate that we have to reckon not only with peoples but kings. Such a monarchy as that of Servia or Bulgaria narrows, personifies, intensifies and misrepresents national feeling. National hatreds and national ambitions can no doubt be at times very malign influences in the world's affairs, but it is the greed and vanities of exceptional monarchs, of the Napoleons and Fredericks the Great, and so forth, that bring these vague, vast feelings to an edge and a crisis. And it will be these same concentrated and over-individualized purposes, these little gods of the coin and postage stamp, that will stand most in the way of a reasonable Schweizerization and pacification of southeastern Europe. The more clearly this is recognized in Europe now, the less likely are they, the less able will they be to obstruct a sane settlement. On our side, at least, this is a war of nations and not of princes. It is for that reason that we have to make the discussion of these national arrangements as open and public as we possibly can. This is not a matter for the quiet little deals of the diplomatists. This is no chance for kings. All the civilized peoples of the earth have to form an idea of the general lines upon which a Pacific Europe can be established, an idea clear and powerful enough to prevent and override the manoeuvres of the chancelleries. The nations themselves have to become the custodians of the common peace. In Italy, indeed, this is already the case. The Italian monarchy is a strong and liberal monarchy, secure in the confidence of its people. But were it not so, it is a fairly evident fact that no betrayal by its rulers would induce the Italian people to make war upon France in the interests of Austria and Prussia. I doubt, too, if the present king of Bulgaria can afford to blunder again. The world moves steadily away from the phase of court-centred nationalism to the phase of a collective national purpose. It is for the whole strength of Western liberalism to throw itself upon the side of that movement, and in no direction can it make its strength so effective at the present time as in the open and energetic promotion of a new and greater Balkan League. End of chapter 10. Recording by Peter Tomlinson. Chapter 11 of The War That Will End War by Herbert George Wells. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Peter Tomlinson. Chapter 11. The War of the Mind. All the realities of this war are things of the mind. This is a conflict of cultures, and nothing else in the world. All the worldwide pain and weariness, fear and anxieties, the bloodshed and destruction, the innumerable torn bodies of men and horses, the stench of putrefaction, the misery of hundreds of millions of human beings, the waste of mankind, are but the material consequences of a false philosophy and foolish thinking. We fight not to destroy a nation, but a nest of evil ideas. We fight because a whole nation has become obsessed by pride, by the cant of cynicism and the vanity of violence, by the evil suggestion of such third-rate writers as Gobineau and Stuart Chamberlain, that they were a people of peculiar excellence destined to dominate the earth, by the base offer of advantage in cunning and treachery held out by such men as Delbruck and Bernhardi, by the theatricalism of the Kaiser, and by two stirring songs about Deutschland and the Rhine. These things, interweaving with the tradesmen's activities of the armaments trust and the common vanity and weaknesses of unthinking men, have been sufficient to release disaster. We do not begin to measure the magnitude of the disaster. On the back of it all, spurring it on, are the idea-mongers, the base-spirited writing men, pretentious little professors in frock coats, scribbling colonels. They are the idea. They pointed the way and whispered, "Go." They ride the world now to catastrophe. It is as if God, in a moment of wild humour, had lent his whirlwinds for an outing to half a dozen fleas. And the real task before mankind is quite beyond the business of the fighting line, the simple, awful business of discrediting and discouraging these stupidities by battleship, artillery, rifle, and the blood and courage of 7 million men. The real task of mankind is to get better sense into the heads of these Germans, and therewith and thereby into the heads of humanity generally, and to end not simply a war, but the idea of war. What printing and writing and talking have done, printing and writing and talking can undo. Let no man be fooled by bulk and matter. Rifles do but kill men, and fresh men are born to follow them. Our business is to kill ideas. The ultimate purpose of this war is propaganda, the destruction of certain beliefs and the creation of others. It is to this propaganda that reasonable men must address themselves. And when I write propaganda, I do not for a moment mean the propaganda with which the name of Mr. Norman Angell is associated. This great modern gospel that war does not pay. That is indeed the only decent and attractive thing that can be said for war. Nothing that is really worth having in life does pay. Men live in order that they may pay for the unpaying things. Love does not pay, art does not pay, happiness does not pay, honesty is not the best policy, generosity invites the ingratitude of the mean. What is the good of this huckster's argument? It revolts all honourable men. But war, whether it pay or not, is an atrociously ugly thing, cruel, destroying countless beauties. Who cares whether war pays or does not pay, when one thinks of some obstinate Belgian peasant woman being interrogated and shot by a hectoring German officer, or of the weakly whimpering mess of some poor hovel with little children in it struck by a shell? Even if war paid 12.5% per annum for ever on every pound it costs to wage, would it be any the less a sickening abomination to every decent soul? And, moreover, it is a bore. It is an unendurable bore. War and the preparation for war, the taxes, the drilling, the interference with every free activity, the arrest and stiffening up of life, the obedience to third-rate people in uniform, of which Berlin-struck Germans have been the implacable exponents, have become an unbearable nuisance to all humanity. Neither Belgium nor France nor Britain is fighting now for glory or advantage. I do not believe Russia is doing so. We are all, I believe, fighting in a fury of resentment because at last, after years of waste and worry to prevent it, we have been obliged to do so. Our grievance is the grievance of every decent, life-loving German, of every German mother and sweetheart who watched her man go off under his incompetent leaders to hardship and mutilations and death. And our propaganda against the Prussian idea has to be no vile argument to the pocket, but an appeal to the common sense and common feelings of humanity. We have to clear the heads of the Germans and keep the heads of our own people clear about this war. Particularly is there need to dissuade our people against the dream of profit filching, the war against German trade. We have to reiterate over and over again that we fight, resolved that at the end no nationality shall oppress any nationality or language again in Europe forever. And by way of illustration, we want not those ingenious arrangements of figures that touch the angel imagination, but photographs of the Kaiser in his glory at a review, and photographs of the long, unintelligent, sidelong face of the Crown Prince, his son, photographs of that great original Krupp taking his pleasures at Capri, and, to set beside these, photographs piteously showing men killed and horribly torn upon the battlefield, and men crippled and women and men murdered, and homes burnt, and, to the verge of indecency, all the peculiar filthiness of war. And the case has thus to be stated, has to be brought before the minds of the Germans, of Americans, of French people and English people, of Swedes and Russians and Italians as our common evil, which, though it be at the expense of several governments, we have to end. Now, how is this literature to be spread? How are we to reach the common people of the Western European countries with these explanations, these assurances, these suggestions that are necessary for the proper ending of this war? I could wish we had a government capable of something more articulate than wait and see, a government that dared confess a national intention to all the world. For what a government says is audible to all the world. King George, too, has the ear of 1,000 million people. If he saw fit to say simply and clearly what it is we fight for and what we seek, his voice would be heard universally, throughout Germany, through all America. No other voice has such penetration. He has told us, watching the war with interest, but that is not enough. We could have guessed that, knowing his spirit. As a nation, we need expression that shall reach the other side. But our government is, I fear, one of those that obey necessity. It is only very reluctantly creative. It rests, therefore, with us who, outside all formal government, represent the national will and intention to take this work into our hands. By means of a propaganda of books, newspaper articles, leaflets, tracts in English, French, German, Dutch, Swedish, Norwegian, Italian, Chinese and Japanese, we have to spread this idea, repeat this idea, and impose upon this war the idea that this war must end war. We have to create a wide common conception of a remapped and pacified Europe, released from the abominable dangers of a private trade in armaments, largely disarmed and pledged to mutual protection. This conception has sprung up in a number of minds, and there have been proposals at once most extraordinary and feasible for its realization. Projects of aeroplanes scattering leaflets across Germany, of armies distributing tracts as they advance, of prisoners of war much afflicted by such literature. These ideas have the absurdity of novelty, but otherwise they are by no means absurd. They will strike many soldiers as being indecent, but the world is in revolt against the standards of soldiering. Never before has the world seen clearly, as it now sees clearly, the role of thought in the making of war. This new conception carries with it the corollary of an entirely new campaign. How can we get at the minds of our enemies? How can we make explanation more powerful than armies and fleets? Failing an articulate voice at the head of our country, we must needs look for the resonating appeal we need in other quarters. We look to the Church that takes for its purposes the name of the Prince of Peace. In England, except for the smallest, meekest protest against war, any sort of war, on the part of a handful of Quakers, Christianity is silent. Its universally present organisation speaks no coherent counsels. Its workers, for the most part, are buried in the loyal manufacture of flannel garments and an inordinate quantity of bed socks for the wounded. It is an extraordinary thing to go now and look at one's parish church and note the pulpit, the orderly arrangements for the hearers, the proclamations on the doors, to sit a while on the stone wall about the graves and survey the comfortable vicarage, and to reflect that this is just the local representation of a universally present organisation for the communication of ideas, that all over Europe there are such pulpits, such possibilities of gathering and saying, and that it gathers nothing and has nothing to say. Pacific, patriotic sentiment it utters perhaps, but nothing that anyone can act upon, nothing to draw together, will, and make an end. It is strange to sit alive in the sunshine and realise that, and to think of how tragically that same realisation came to another mind in Europe. Several things have happened during the past few weeks with the intensest symbolic quality. The murder of Joris, for example, but surely nothing has occurred so wonderful and touching as the death of the Pope, that faithful, honest, simple old man. The war and the perplexity of the war darkened his last hours. Once the Church could have stopped this thing, he said, with a sense of threads missed and controls that have slipped away. It may be with a sense of vivifying help, discouraged and refused. The Tribuna tells a story that, if not true, is marvellously invented, of the Austrian representative coming to ask him for a blessing on the Austrian arms. He feigned not to hear, or perhaps he did not hear. The Austrian asked again, and again there was silence. Then at the third request, when he could be silent no longer, he broke out, "No, bless peace." As the temperature of his weary body rose, his last clear moments were spent in attempts to word telegrams that should have some arresting hold upon the gigantic crash that was coming, and in his last delirium he lamented war and the impotence of the Church. Intellect without faith is the devil, but faith without intellect is a negligent angel with rusty weapons. This European catastrophe is the tragedy of the weak, though righteous Christian will. We begin to see that to be right and indolent, or right and scornfully silent, or right and abstinent from the conflict, is to be wrong. Righteousness has need to be as clear and efficient and to do things as sedulously in the right way as any evil doer. There is no meaning in the Christianity of a Christian who is not now a propagandist for peace, who is not now also a politician. There is no faith in the liberalism that merely carps at the manner of our entanglement in a struggle that must alter all the world forever. We need not only to call for peace, but to seek and show and organise the way of peace. One thinks of governments and the church and the press, and then, turning about for some other source of mental control, we recall the organisations, the really quite opulent organisations that are professedly devoted to the promotion of peace. There is no voice from The Hague. The so-called peace movement in our world has consumed money enough and service enough to be something better than a weak little grumble at the existence of war. What is this movement and its organisations doing now? 99 people in Europe out of every 100 are complaining of war now. It needs no specially endowed committees to do that. They preach to a converted world. The question is how to end it and prevent its reoccurrence. But have these specially peace-seeking people ever sought for the secret springs of war, or looked into the powers that war for war, or troubled to learn how to grasp war and subdue it? All Germany is knit by the fighting spirit and armed beyond the rest of the world. Until the mind of Germany is changed, there can be no safe place on earth. But that, it seems, does not trouble the professional peace advocate, if only he may cry peace, and live somewhere in comfort, and with the comfortable sense of a superior descent from the general emotion. How are we to gather together the wills and understanding of men for the tremendous necessities and opportunities of this time? Thought, speech, persuasion, an incessant appeal for clear intentions, clear statements for the dispelling of suspicion and the abandonment of secrecy and trickery. There is work for every man who writes or talks and has the slightest influence upon another creature. This monstrous conflict in Europe, the slaughtering, the famine, the confusion, the panic and hatred and lying pride, it is all of it real only in the darkness of the mind. At the coming of understanding, it will vanish as dreams vanish at awakening. But never will it vanish until understanding has come. It goes on only because we, who are voices, who suggest, who might elucidate and inspire, are ourselves such little scattered creatures that though we strain to the breaking point, we still have no strength to turn on the light that would save us. There have been moments in the last 3 weeks when life has been a waking nightmare, one of those frozen nightmares when, with salvation within one's reach, one cannot move, and the voice dies in one's throat. End of chapter 11. Recording by Peter Tomlinson. End of the War That Will End War by Herbert George Wells.